At the Turning Point USA 2019 Student Action Summit, we sit down with conservative commentator Michael Knowles to discuss what he sees as the radical decline of free speech in America, especially on college campuses. Michael Knowles, wonderful to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me back.
So, today here we're at Turning Point USA, obviously, Student Action Summit. You were talking about violence on campus, just in general, Antifa. You were actually up with Mr. Andy Ngo.
He knows a thing or two about leftist violence.
He knows a little thing about So, this has been big on your mind lately for personal reasons.
It is, and not just from the perspective of the violent attacks. Obviously, that's terrible. We need to throw these jerks in prison and discourage it from happening. But I think it actually says more about how we're viewing politics as a country, because what the left has done to justify this violence is they've said speech is violence. So if a conservative comes and gives a speech, that is a violent act that therefore justifies an act of actual violence, physical violence, against the speaker. It turns an aggressive act into a defensive act. That's the first part of it. But the key here is that speech is not just some little aspect of politics. Speech is politics. Politics is speech, speech is politics. That is how we exist, especially in a self-government. Okay. What separates us from the brutes, and I don't just mean the Antifa brutes, I mean the actual animals, is that we have intellect and will. We can speak, we can communicate ideas.
Sure.
In a self-governing republic such as ours, that's the only way that we're supposed to be able to govern ourselves. So when the left censors us and threatens us with physical violence, they win the political battle right off the bat because they've taken away the only tool that we have in politics. But then on the flip side of it, by equating speech with violence, they are creating the impression that they have won the political argument simply because they have vanquished us physically. That is to say, in the olden days,
Yeah.
in order, if you're debating a political point, you'd make your argument, I'd make my argument. And then
the audience
can
about
decide.
it.
Right, they get to think about it, and maybe you made the better argument, maybe I did.
If debating class, actually.
Debating class, right?
Right, yeah.
Now, if speech is violence, then debating class becomes boxing class. And it doesn't matter what our views of the topic are. It doesn't matter what arguments we make. If I can clock you in the head faster and harder than you can clock me in the head, then I win. And the very fact of that physical victory is taken to be a political victory. It's now inverted the idea that right has might. And what the left is saying is that might makes right. The very fact that I can beat you physically means I'll beat your speech. It is an inversion of our self-governing republic, and unfortunately a lot of people are buying it.
So it's sort of, I guess it started, another sort of an intermediate thing is, I guess what they call heckler's veto,
yeah.
Right? You just kind of shout down the person so they can't be heard.
Yep.
I've seen that a lot. I've seen you being heckled heavily.
Yes, I'll go to these events and you'll have most people are totally normal and they want to hear the lecture, and then a small group of radical activists who have no idea who I am, by the way. They've never Googled me. They don't know what they're actually offended by. I had someone at a speech say, I don't know who you are, but I hate you. I thought that summed it up. But they will just scream so that no one else in the room can hear what you're saying. And actually, one event where that happened, I kept giving my speech and they got so frustrated someone kicked in the door and squirted me with chemicals.
Yes, that's right. I remember. You were okay in the end, right?
They never paid for my blazer that they ruined. I'm really upset about that, but physically I was fine. However, it's not always innocuous chemicals that they squirt at you. Sometimes it's a rock that they throw at Andy Ngo's head or other speakers. Sometimes they give whiplash to professors when Charles Murray gives a speech. I'm fine buying a new blazer, but we're seeing this escalate. Just this year alone, you've had shooters who have identified with the radical left, who are actually going out killing people. You've had people engaging in acts of terrorism in the United States. That's only in the span of a couple years since this even really began in earnest.
Like basically to stop speech, you mean?
Right.
Okay. You feel fear for your life? You've been basically, you keep traveling around to different campuses to talk about, well, I guess free speech, ironically,
yeah.
Right?
Isn't that funny?
Among other topics. what is the chief charge against you?
So they say that I'm a racist, sexist, phobic, all the phobics. I'm not just one phobic, it's all the phobics. Fascist, all these terrible things. And the people who say this are people that have never listened to a word I've said or read a word I've written. So I was at GW, and I was giving a speech at GW, which stands, by the way, for George Washington University.
Yes.
I was asked to give a very controversial speech defending George Washington. And this was all happening, by the way, in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Should have been uncontroversial, right? So like a kind of a freebie speech. The students lost their minds. I mean, there's a group of about 20 of them. All at once, they stood up, started screaming, F you, F you, F you. And I said, what have I said that has offended you? Tell me what I've said. None of them could say it. None of them had anything. They had no idea what it was. They actually had to set an alarm to let them all know when they were going to stand up and scream profanity at me, because I wasn't saying anything that would trigger them to do it.
Right.
So they had to put it out on their own. They're very angry. And what's interesting to me about this is not the, oh, woe is me, some wacko is going to off me someday to speech. I'm a big boy, I'll be fine, I hope. And if I'm not fine, I'll go up and see the good Lord up in paradise. So either way, hopefully it'll turn out well. What interests me about this is their anger, because they're obviously completely wrong about why they're angry. They're not angry at me. They don't even know who I am. But their anger is real. And I suspect it's legitimate. I mean, they've come from this culture which has a ton of broken homes, which has social chaos, which doesn't respect the rule of law, which tells them that men can be women and women can be men, and they have to follow all of their desires all the way to the end, and there's no transcendent moral order, and life is a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury signifying nothing. This is a generation that more than any other in recent memory has been raised without any sort of religious worldview, without any grounding in what we are. I mean, the transgender movement, which is where a lot of this comes from, is the hottest issue on campus. Everywhere I go, they tell me, it's gender. I said, gender? Transgenderism affects like 7 people. Why on earth is that the biggest issue? The brilliance of transgenderism is it actually acknowledges a sort of eternal truth, which is that we're not just meat, we're not just flesh, we have a soul. And so the transgenderism gets it wrong, because they say that my physical body, I might be a man, but in my immaterial body, my immaterial soul, secretly I'm a woman. They're obviously wrong about this, but they're sensing a truth that has been denied them for their whole childhoods. And I think they're very angry about this. They're angry that they've been lied to about the nature of the moral order. And I just don't think they should put that on me. They got to put that on their parents and teachers.
It's fascinating. We're just watching, there's this kind of huge attack on an unexpected character, J.K. Rowling. I don't know, have you?
I saw this.
You've been following this. It's very, I mean, it's kind of fascinating.
It is. Right? J.K. Rowling is a very left-wing person. She always, I mean, every 3 weeks they seem to make a new Harry Potter character gay. They rewrite the characters from 10 years ago, and they're going to make the owl gay soon, because she's so leaning into social justice. But she didn't go far enough, because she said that women should have their own identity, that women ought to be allowed to be women, and that men can't maybe magically become women. It shows you an important lesson here. For the majority of people who are in the center or center left or center right even, who go along with this leftist craziness and say, yeah, we can kill babies, yeah, men can be women and women can be men, yeah, and they say, but they don't really believe it, right? They don't really believe the world is ending in 10 years from global warming, but they just go along with it because it's easier and they consider it compassionate. But it's not easier. The leftist ideological mob will never let you get away. Even J.K. Rowling, who is very, very liberal, they came for her too. So I just think in the long run, it's not a strategy to tell lies and to acquiesce to the demands of the often violent leftist mob. They're not going to let you off the hook.
There's a lot of, yet there are a lot of people that believe in these things. Like the people that come and yell at you when you're giving your talk, they're doing it because they believe in something. They will somehow believe that that allowing you to speak is terrible.
Right. Well, they also are just terribly ignorant. And I say that I don't mean to say that insultingly. I just mean they don't know anything.
Yes.
And
well,
this is
about you, right?
They don't know anything about anything. I mean, their education has been so poor, and this has been a problem in this country for 50 years. There was a study out of ISI 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I'm sure it's gotten worse since then, that showed that at the top universities in the country, incoming freshmen knew more about their government and their history than graduating seniors. They were getting more ignorant over time.
Run that by me again.
I know. It's a very difficult one to wrap your head around. And that's at Harvard,
and this is
Yale,
in humanities.
Princeton.
These are students
These are
that have gone
students,
into humanities. I mean, I can imagine, getting fixated on your math, your physics project.
I guess.
I don't know.
But even then, you think you might remember the basics
Right.
but they barely learn them in high school anyway. And so they're coming into this without any understanding of what they're refuting. John Haidt did a study that came out a while ago, which said conservatives understand liberals much more than liberals understand conservatives. So they don't understand what we're saying. And then there's the pride. Pride has been raised to the level of a secular virtue. I mean, it went from being the deadliest of the 7 deadly sins to now we have a whole month celebrating it. Used to be that pride was about celebrating homosexuality or different sexual desires. Now it's just about pride. They actually now have a separate month for homosexuality, which is October, but on the secular liturgical calendar, June is now for pride itself. And these kids are very, very prideful. Humility is the beginning of wisdom. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. They don't know what they don't know, and so it just makes them look ridiculous. And you're not going to be able to fix that until we take pride away as the biggest virtue in the culture and we reinstate humility.
I missed the memo about this Pride, actual Pride Month.
It's pride. It's all pride, yeah. I mean, because it's not even, it used to be gay pride.
Yeah.
Now there's fat pride, skinny pride. There's slut pride. It's a real thing. There's black pride, Hispanic pride, all sorts of pride. I think now more straight people go to the pride parade than gay people do because it's become a center of the culture. Actually, the October month makes a lot more sense to say we're going to have a month now to sort of examine the history of LGBTQ rights and understanding in the country. All right, I mean, that's an historical and social phenomenon. But pride, I mean, that is actually just a moral question. It's a moral virtue. And when these kids show up, we believe this new idea that young people know more than old people. I mean, the left has embraced this for 50, 60 years. You see it in the environmentalist movement. You see it on the gun rights movement. That for some reason, we're all supposed to be listening to kids. Kids, by definition, are ignorant. That's why they go to school and get an education.
Right.
But we've Cardinal John Henry Newman, St. John Henry Newman, wrote about this a lot. He was one of the great writers on universities. He wrote The Idea of the University. He said, in all aspects of life, you have to train. You have to educate yourself. You have to grow. You have to work to get better at these things. And yet so many people in the realm of religion, or now even in the realm of the academy and political activism, they will say, I don't need to train, I don't need to read anything, I don't need to think, I just have my feelings, which are going to now constitute my view, and if you don't agree with it, we're going to throw a rock at your head.
Wow, now I'm really depressed.
I hope I made you feel so great here.
I guess your response to this is just keep sharing your perspective in whatever way you can.
Yes,
right?
and ask questions. I mean, I named my speaking tour for this year. It's called the Men Are Not Women and Other Uncomfortable Truths Tour. You think that's not a terribly uncomfortable truth, and yet on campus today it is.
I think it's a terribly provocative title for a tour name.
You know, these days, I mean, but the reason I named it that, I named almost every one of the speeches was another completely innocuous opinion that is now considered very, very controversial. For instance, one of them I said, the world isn't going to end in 10 years. Now, this is uncontroversial, or it should be, and it used to be a cause of celebration. So good, we got a little more time. Now people are upset when you tell them that.
There really are people that are upset.
They're furious. Well, because all of the environmentalist movement is really a way to get socialism by the back door. I mean, that's why the Green New Deal, $93 trillion, has a provision for universal health, socialist health care, a provision for reparations for slavery, massive redistribution of wealth. None of that has to do with the environment.
You know, I saw, I don't know if you saw this paper, but I was reminded of this. There was a paper about how nuclear energy, which is, if you agree that, global warming is a serious issue, it's something that needs to be dealt with. An obvious solution to that is to do much more energy using nuclear, because it actually provides a lot of energy.
There's nothing
with
even
very little waste.
It is so
global,
efficient. It is more efficient than any other form of energy, by a country mile.
And no CO2, or very very limited. Right, exactly. But I remember reading this paper, and this was in a ostensibly serious publication, that no, absolutely it cannot be. Essentially for social justice reasons, right? So it just kind of flipped this whole idea on its head, right? What you're saying, that if there's a political, there's a political motivation.
Well, and there's maybe some wisdom there, because nuclear is totally safe. It's been completely safe in the United States. It's produced a lot of very clean energy. However, there have been meltdowns around some, communist places. We think of Chernobyl or something like that. And I suppose, the left's environmental agenda is to turn us all into a socialist hellscape anyway. So I guess that would make nuclear less safe, because we'd end up as some sort of like farcical version of the Soviet Union. So maybe they've got some really deep wisdom, or they're simply not making any sense.
Yeah. Well, except that there's these new reactor, or not even new, they're a kind of old technology, like I think it's molten salt, and so where there's various technologies. They actually eat nuclear waste. So they've created this nuclear waste. These new reactors, they actually eat that nuclear waste to create energy. They don't create a lot of waste, and they can't melt down. So this technology is out there.
This is the aspect of the whole environmentalist movement, and frankly, of so much of the leftist anger right now, is they pretend that we never invent new things. So they just pretend that everything is static. The economy is static. Human knowledge is static. The environmental technology is static. It's not. You know how if global warming is a real threat to the survival of humanity, we'll just fix it. We'll just come up with something that eats nuclear energy and turns it into another form of energy. We'll just fix. That's what we've always done. It's always worked out just fine. And every other doomsday prediction hasn't come to fruition. So that's a hopeful note to leave.
No, that's actually pretty good. What's next on the agenda for you?
So I'm going to be completely turning off Twitter and the news and everything.
Wow.
Look, they've impeached the president rather. What else can they do? I am going to be heading up for Christmas and New Year's and taking at least a few days off. I'll actually still have my show next week, so I guess I won't. I guess I'll just have to be working the whole way. But it's very fun, because amid all of these upsetting stories, Andy Ngo gets pelted in the head with rocks, or people are being shut down, or whatever, sometimes we forget that we're winning. We won in 2016. We got 185 judges or something on the courts who are actually defending the Constitution.
You're talking
the conservative movement.
Okay.
Yeah, I think. And by the way, I include centrists in that. I include even center-left. I mean, I think there are a lot of people. There's a lot of room between being the most radical rock-ribbed Republican and thinking that men are men and women are women. There's a lot of people in there, and we are winning on that subject. And conservatives specifically, we're winning on the issue of pro-life. We're winning on the question of impeachment. Since impeachment began, President Trump is much more popular today than he was a month ago. Support for impeachment and removal has fallen among Democrats by 13 points, according to a CNN poll, of all things. I would never encourage you to believe a CNN poll, but it tells you something when it comes from that source. I think things are pretty good. I think the left is furious, and they're having their temper tantrum because we're winning, because we're making better arguments, and because we're not giving in to them. We were talking about virtues earlier. The prerequisite for all virtue is courage. And in this moment, I think right-minded people, whether they're on the actual conservative movement or they just have a right way of thinking, they're sensible centrists, they are demonstrating some courage, and I think it's paying dividends.
Michael Knowles, such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's so good to be here again.